Morena te whānau, ko rihari toko ingoa. I'm Richard Goodwin, yeah, and thanks Clint. I don't need you to tell you that Clint is a nice guy and he's awesome, and so all that back at you, Clint. I enjoy having Clint around, and he's the big man at Pathways. He's the chair of our board, and he does a really good job. Real pleasure to be here. So I just want to start off just telling you a little bit about Pathways. It is a shameless plug. But I just want to tell you a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and if you get them right, you get a prize. It will come in the mail. I'll explain in a moment. So let me tell you about Pathways. Listen up, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions. So Pathways Bible College has been around a long time, and it's been, actually, we're 66 years now, and our real passion and our vision is really to take, ordinary believers and give them the ability to dig deep into the scriptures, into theology, and expand their understanding of who God is, and at the same time do it in a very practically oriented way. So Pathways is not just the sort of Bible college you go to and you live in a sort of a bubble where it doesn't sort of meet the real world, because our model is that our students are doing ministry. So we've had a lot of students come through Life Switch over the years, and so they've been here as interns. They spend half their time doing stuff. So I know the names Iggy and Fuse and Camp Survivor and all that kind of stuff, because I have heard it time and again from all the various interns and that have come from Life Switch. And so they're doing their ministry, and then about every 6 weeks or so, they zip off to Tauranga for a week, and that's where we hit them with like the lectures and the content and all that kind of classroom, academic kind of stuff. So it's a 50-50 split at our Level 5 program, which is, Level 5 is the equivalent of first year university. And so that's our kind of flagship, if you like, probably the best known program. But we do have a new-ish program. It's just in its second year. It's a second year program. So Level 6, that's the equivalent of second year university. And that's really focused on leadership. And even if you haven't done Level 5, but you've got a bit of, a reasonable amount of like ministry experience, you might even be able to go straight into Level 6 if you're kind of thinking, I really want to focus on leadership. So I just want to encourage you to think about Pathways. If you want to go deeper in your faith while staying connected to your community here and being able to actually serve and not just be doing assignments all the time, though there are those. If that sounds like a bit of you, then hit me up. Hit Clint up and just ask us about it. I've got some info with me, flyers you can take away with you. Of course, everything's online as well. Just come get me, and I'd love to chat with you. Or you can just contact me, and I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Again, details on the flyer there or on our website. Right, so question time. Who can tell me how long, if you take Pathways history, it's had a few different iterations, but throughout its history, how long has Pathways been around? Boom. 66 years. This man. What's your name? Jack Jones. Do you want a t-shirt or a water bottle, Jack? All right, man. Just text me. My number's on that. And text me a photo of you going. And I'll send you a t-shirt, okay? And give me your size. And all right, next question. What level is our new-ish qualification? Level 6. For bonus points, what's that the equivalent of? Oh, yeah. You know it. Good job. T-shirt or water bottle? The water bottles are pretty snappy. Again, you just text me that, and I'll send that out to you, okay? All right. Okay, so that's Pathways. I love it. I know Clint loves it. And Clint, man, he is a workhorse and puts a lot of time that he could just be doing other stuff. It's not like a lucrative gig for him at all. It's just something he does out for the love of it and because he believes in it. So, big believer. We're both big believers in it, and thanks to you folk who have gotten behind us over the years. All right, let's get into it, eh? Right, I want us to start with the question, what is God like? humans have been asking this question for, well, pretty much since we've been around, I mean, it's a part of being human is to sort of wonder who's out there and how did we get here and what's life all about, and that leads to that question, what is God like? Now, the answers that we've been coming up with and still come up with vary greatly. So let's think about the ancient Greeks and how sometimes some of them would have answered the question of what is God like? This is a statue of a figure called Prometheus. Not a god, he's a titan. But he, according to the Greek myth, stole fire from the gods to give it to humans. We need fire. Fire is an important part of humans being able to flourish. And so, but it's like Prometheus had to go and steal that for us to get that. These gods weren't just going to pour it out on us abundantly, not according to this view, right? And actually, not only that, but Zeus, the chief god in the Greek belief system, he punished Prometheus for taking fire and giving it to us. And the way he punished him was pretty cruel. He chained him to a rock and had an eagle come and pick out his liver and eat it. But he didn't die. In fact, overnight his wounds would regenerate, and then the next day the eagle would come back and do the same thing. And then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, forever and ever and ever. And this is their god, Zeus. So how might they answer that question? What is God like? Might say he's a malevolent God. All right, next slide, please. This is a Bible that is in a museum in the States, and it is the Bible that belonged to Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers in the United States. And Benjamin Franklin, you can see he kind of took to his Bible with some scissors. And the reason for that is because there are parts of the Bible that he didn't like. And the parts of the Bible he didn't like, there were actually a lot of them, because they were all the parts that had anything that was kind of miraculous, anything that sort of seemed supernatural. He just didn't believe that that was even possible. He didn't like that. And so all he was left with were, the moral teachings and that sort of a thing. That's the only part that he could really stomach. The rest he didn't think was believable because he didn't believe that this God got involved. He believed in an uninvolved God. The fancy technical term is deism. And in his day and age, there were lots of people who were deists. And this is still with us today. This idea of deism is, yeah, God's out there and maybe God's created everything, but he's not getting involved. He doesn't interfere. He doesn't intervene. It's almost like he's just sort of on his couch watching TV and not interested in what's going on here, or certainly not getting involved. An uninvolved God. That's a common view. All right, next slide. These, they kind of look like what you see when you look at the sky. You know how, are you with me? Like when you look at the sky, do you see like these little things floating around in your eyes? Good. I was just about to freak out that I'm the only one. Right? We have these things in our eyes that look a bit like that, but that's not what this is. These little things here are parasitic worms. I did look up the name and how to pronounce it. Forgotten it. It's hard. I can't remember. It's like a scientific sort of name. But these worms, their whole goal in life, the whole reason for their existence, and what they get pumped up about is burrowing into a human eye and making the human blind. That's what they do. And I thought about this and know about this because Stephen Fry, he's a famous British actor, and he's, apart from being famous for acting, he's also famous for being an atheist. And when he was interviewed about this and they said, why are you an atheist? He said, well, yeah, the world's great in some ways, but it's also horrific. Like, for example, there are these worms and they burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind, and that's their whole purpose. That, what does that say about God? For Stephen Fry, it just means that this God is absent, that there is no God. And so we're going to be thinking about what is God like? And I want us to spend time in a couple of passages in particular this morning. And so if you have your physical Bible or a Bible app and you want to get things lined up, first of all, we're going to go to Acts chapter 8, and then we're going to go to Acts 53. And because they're long passages, I don't have them on the screen, so I would encourage you to do that. Now, in Ethiopia, there is a church. I don't just mean like one single church. I mean, a denomination, if you like. Now, it's probably not a surprise to you that there are Ethiopian churches. I mean, there are churches all over the world. This kingdom of God and the family of God is a global thing now, which is fantastic. And actually, in terms of numbers, the majority of the church now globally is in Africa and Asia. And so, no surprises that there's a church in Ethiopia. There are believers in Jesus Christ in Ethiopia. No surprises there. But I don't know about you, but when I sort of think about the church in Africa, I often just assume, that's kind of been there the last couple of hundred years. In the 1800s, British missionaries or Western missionaries were going off and going to places in Africa and spreading the gospel. But here's the thing. That wasn't the first time the gospel arrived in Ethiopia. There is a church, a denomination in Ethiopia called the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and it is one of the oldest denominations or Christian tribes or, however you want to imagine it, but they're one of the oldest in existence. They go back to almost the beginning. They go back to like the 1st century. And so while it's not a surprise that there are churches there now and that the gospel has reached Ethiopia now, it might be a little bit of a surprise to think, actually, the church and Christians have been there for pretty much like 2,000 years almost. How did it get there? How did it get to Ethiopia? Well, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, this old church, they trace their origins back to Acts chapter 8. So let's have a look at that. Acts chapter 8, verse 26. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south to the road, the desert road that goes from Jerusalem to Gaza. So he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of the Kandake, which means Queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. Do you understand what you're reading? Philip asked. How can I? He said, unless someone explains it to me. So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now, let's just stop there for a moment and kind of get oriented. So here you've got this guy from Ethiopia. He's a eunuch. That was a thing. Meant that he was pretty high up there, in sort of Ethiopian society and government. He's got money. He's in a chariot. He's reading a scroll of Isaiah, which he is definitely a baller, but he's also a eunuch. And that means he can't have kids. That means he's not going to have someone to carry on his name. That means he might feel that in some significant way, he's not able to leave the legacy that he might have wanted to. So, yeah, he's got some good things going for him in his life, but he's also got pain. And biblical scholars debate, what was this guy doing in Jerusalem? And it's clear, though, that he was there to worship the God of Israel. And we don't know whether he was had gone the whole 9 yards and going, yeah, I'm a full Jew or what have you, but he was there to worship the God of Israel. Why was an Ethiopian eunuch going up to Jerusalem, which would have taken him ages, to worship the God of Israel? What was the attraction there? And we know that he's reading the scroll of Isaiah. I'm saying scroll, right? Because, of course, he didn't have it in a book. It was a scroll form, and you had to be pretty wealthy to have any kind of scrolls like that. But he's reading that, and I just wonder if one thing that really captured his imagination is actually from that same scroll. If you just go down the scroll a little bit, in what we call Isaiah 56. Now, this with the passage that we get to, that we're looking at here in Acts 8, has a quotation from Isaiah 53. So the part of Isaiah that he was reading is only just a little bit up the scroll from this next bit. Ellen, can we go to the slide that has Isaiah 56 on it? Yeah, thank you. So let me read this to you. For this is what the Lord says to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant. To them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. Maybe that was the reason that eunuch was there, going up to Jerusalem to worship the God of Israel. Because even though he's maybe doesn't have the family to carry forward his name and to carry on the legacy and to pour himself into, this God has got something for him. And he wants in. And he scrolls back up the scroll. You know, maybe he's reading through his favorite part. You know, this part of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures where there are these rich promises for someone like him, but he's trying to understand it better and he's trying to grapple with it. And he gets to what we call Isaiah 53, and he's reading out loud. According to my dad, I don't know, but apparently reading in your head silently is a relatively modern phenomenon. It's only been in relatively recent human history that humans have tended to be able to do that. And so he's reading out loud, and Philip hears it and goes, I know that. I know what he's reading. And I think I can help him understand it. And this is what he's reading. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he didn't open his mouth. In his humiliation, he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. And the eunuch asked Philip, tell me please, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else? Then Philip began with that very passage of Scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. That eunuch came to faith in Jesus. He was baptized, took the gospel with him, and that is how at least the Ethiopian Orthodox Church understand how the gospel reached them very early on in the life of the church. And the way that gospel was told, it wasn't through like giving a book of Mark or even a scroll of Mark to this Ethiopian eunuch, because that hadn't been written yet. None of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they hadn't been written. None of the New Testament had been written. You know, you couldn't go to Romans and some of you might have heard of the Romans Road. It's kind of this classic way of sharing the story about Jesus and the gospel by just a few select key verses in the book of Romans. You couldn't do that. Didn't have any New Testament, right? So how do you preach the gospel of Jesus without a New Testament? Well, this guy, Philip, he just uses the scriptures they did have, the Hebrew scriptures, the only scriptures he knew, what we call the Old Testament, and specifically Isaiah. And he reads this passage that we refer to usually as Isaiah 53, but it does actually start just at the end of Isaiah 52. And I want us to read this because I want us to consider what was this passage that captured this Ethiopian's heart and imagination and brought him to belief in Jesus. What was the passage in the Old Testament that did? I want to know what was the passage that Philip went to tell the message of Jesus from the book of Isaiah, and want to understand it in its context. So let me read it to you, because as I read it, this is telling us what God is like. Okay? Let me read. It'll take a couple of minutes, but it's worth it. Starting chapter 52, verse 13. See, my servant will act wisely. He'll be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he didn't open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he didn't open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. This is the good news of Jesus Christ from the Old Testament. This is the gospel that Philip was able to explain to this Ethiopian eunuch. This was the message and the picture of God, who's already promised to this eunuch that, hey, I've got a plan for you, and I've got a place for you, and I've got blessings for you. And he gets this picture of what God is like. And this God, he looks maybe a bit like this. Can we put up that sculpture? The Tortured Christ by Brazilian artist Guido Rocha. Now, this is very different to the images of Christ on the cross that we often see, but I like that it captures something about Jesus' experience, and more importantly, who God is, that we sometimes overlook. You know, going back to Isaiah 53, just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, his form marred beyond human likeness, despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. This is God as a human being, and he doesn't look glorious and remarkable. He doesn't look like what we expect a king to look like, much less God himself. But this is what God is like. If we really want to know what God is like, we need to look at Jesus. And in Jesus, we learn that this God, next slide, is a compassionate God. Now, let's think about that word compassionate. We know that meaning, that word, and know its meaning. But I want to dig into it a bit deeper because there's sort of a depth of meaning that I really want to get at here. Compassion comes from it has a Latin origin. And so the Latin roots here are com, which means with, and passio, which means suffering. Passio, when we talk about passion plays or the passion of the Christ, and it's like the suffering of Jesus, that's why we call it passion. Because in Latin it means suffering, and the com part means with. So when we say that in Jesus we see that God is a compassionate God, or when I say that, what I'm meaning is not just that he thinks, oh, poor people. That's a part of it, but it's much deeper. It's that this is a God who suffers with us. I don't know about you, but I've experienced some suffering in my life. In fact, I do know you've experienced suffering in your life. In fact, some of you are probably experiencing it hard out right now. And, people have all sorts of views about God, but The God that is revealed to us in Jesus is a God who suffers with you and with me, with us, in all the mess and all the pain and the hard stuff that comes with being human. God is a God who, out of compassion, out of a desire to suffer with, lowered himself and became ugly, became frail, became human. That is the God we worship. And it's so counterintuitive. When we think about a king, we usually think a king's greatness is in his power. And when we look at King Charles, for example, when he was crowned, we kind of see that, right? That he's got these robes and he's got gold around him and signs of wealth and power. And I don't know if you find that very impressive. You might find it funny. I don't know. But certainly what the sort of message he's wanting to send is that he has power. And that's what kings have always done and continue to do, to show that they are great because they have power. What does God do when he wants to show us why he's great? He does something completely different. Becomes a human being, a one that's marred and disfigured and bears our pain and suffering, and by his wounds we are healed. And the greatness of the King is in his humility. It's in that willingness to say, I don't need to hang on to my godness, but I am going to go and suffer with these people who I love. And he calls us to do likewise. Let me give you an example of someone who did that. But first, I need to tell you a little bit about leprosy. Leprosy, they used to think that leprosy was a disease where bits of your body fell off. Now, you can see this person has leprosy and they've lost some fingers. But leprosy doesn't do that exactly. Not necessarily, although that is often what it leads to. What leprosy is a bacterial thing, not highly contagious, but it was thought to be at one time. But it is somewhat contagious or infectious. I forget which of the differences. And it's a bacteria that basically deadens and eats away at nerves. So somebody with leprosy loses the ability to feel pain. And at first blush, that sounds awesome. In reality, it's horrific. Your body is always sending you pain signals. And your pain signals are telling you, hey, look after this part of your body, otherwise it's going to get even more damaged. We need a chance to repair, so just hold off. Go easier on this part of the body. Your body's sending you pain signals all the time. That's why you move around in your seat and you're not even thinking about it. That's why when you're walking a wee distance, your gait changes a little bit. It's pain signals, but someone with leprosy doesn't feel pain. Then what happens is they touch something hot, they go for a walk, even things like blinking, they may not do because they don't have that pain signal telling them to make all these adjustments. And so they end up with cuts and bruises and ulcers and infections and all sorts of things like this start to happen as a result. But the key thing to remember is that leprosy, you lose the ability to feel pain. Now, when leprosy came to Hawaii, they did what humans have done for thousands of years with leprosy. They quarantined people with leprosy. They sent them to a leper colony. So this is Molokai in Hawaii today, but this is Molokai about in the 1800s when it was a leper colony. They got sent there, and the place was a bit of a mess. There was no one really running it. There was just a lot of people with this illness there, and the Hawaiian government really needed some people to go and be there. But who is going to put up their hand and go live in a leper colony unless they themselves have leprosy? Who's going to want to do that? Probably not many people, right? But there are a small handful of believers, one of whom was this guy, Father Damien. Now, Father Damien, he went there, he lived among them, he prayed with them, he sat with them, chatted with them, ate with them, dressed their wounds, conducted their funerals. He was like their pastor in that place and a friend. He'd been there, I think he was there a total of 16 years. I think he'd been there something like, somewhere between 10 and a dozen years. I think about 10 years. And he touched something hot and he couldn't feel it. And he realized he had leprosy. He caught leprosy and became a leper. This is him about the time he started at the leper colony. And this is him, that date is wrong, by the way, sorry. This is him, late 1880s. He now has leprosy. And you can see it's done a number on how he looks on his face. This is him on his deathbed. Next slide. You can see his hands are gnarly. You know, he's disfigured. He's marred. He's like the suffering servant that we encounter in Isaiah 53, that the Ethiopian eunuch was told about on his way home. That's what he's like. And this is what he said, Father Damien. I make myself a leper with the lepers to gain all to Jesus Christ. Our God is a compassionate God. He became a leper to suffer with us lepers. He became a human to suffer with us, to feel and to know what it's like to be human and to go through it with us. And whatever you're facing or faced or will face, that is hard. Excuse me. God will feel it with you. That is a compassionate God that we worship. And calls us to do likewise. And when we do that, the pattern we see in Isaiah 53 is that in that humility, in that compassion, and that lowering of yourself and giving yourself away, you'll be honored and you'll be great. And that's true of Father Damien. He is considered great. There's a statue of him in Hawaii honoring him because that is real greatness there. And we are to do the same thing. In Philippians chapter 2, we get a beautiful picture of it. I'm trying to think if I left the card. Oh, yeah, here it is. I've got the card here. You are being given a card here, which in a really beautiful way, most scholars think this is an early Christian hymn. And it made it into the book of Philippians. This early Christian song that talks about the fact that God didn't cling to his godness, but instead humbled himself and became that human being who suffers with us to the point where we don't recognize him. He's ugly. We don't want to have anything to do with him, but in doing so, he bears our muck and our guilt and our sin. And that brings healing to us. And that's the God we worship. And in Philippians chapter 2, we get that picture, and Paul, the writer, tells us to do the same thing in our lives. And I know that this is a community that wants to do that more and more. I know it's a community that has been doing it. So may you, Life Switch, be individually but collectively also people who enter into and suffer with those around you, within the family of faith, but also with those that are beyond this family at the moment. Those that are out there in the hut and in Wellington who are suffering because they're everywhere. And we suffer with them. And in that, may they encounter this God, a compassionate God. Let me pray. King Jesus, we worship you not primarily because you're big and mighty and strong and powerful, though you are those things. We worship you because you're compassionate, because you're humble, because you didn't leave us to our own devices. You didn't leave us in our own quandary, but you came into it. And you continue to do that with us. You suffer with us. That is what you're like. And we want to be like you. We want to be like you, Jesus. We want to be people who suffer with. There are people suffering in our society, in our culture, in this room, everywhere. May we be the kind of people who, like Jesus, suffer with them. And I pray that you would empower us to do that and to represent you well to the world around us. We don't want to be giving people a picture of God that is not true, that you are somehow unkind, or that you are malevolent, or that you are absent, but we want to be the proof that you are near and suffering with us and offering us hope. I pray that this church would be known as great in its own way because it suffers with the people around and ultimately for making your name great. So we thank you, praise you, King Jesus. Amen.